Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 163 and I'm the show's host, Kyle. Got a lot of different news stories to touch on from all around the world today, so for those of you who want to keep everybody up to date on foreign policy, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com or libertarianinstitute.org. You find the show from either of those two sites, and please think about sharing it. Alright, so first thing I guess I'll open with is Trump's proposed tariffs. I guess he hasn't actually signed them into law. That would be 25% import or tariff on steel imports and 10% on aluminum imports. The idea of this is, from Trump's perspective at least, is to help make up for the trade imbalances that we have with other countries like China, where every month they're selling us billions of dollars more in goods than we're selling them. And this is, reflected with the Chinese owning an awful lot of American debt. There's an awful lot of content out there that all of you could look up. This is an economic show on the economics and why tariffs typically don't work to achieve the ends that they're trying to achieve. The bigger reason I want to just bring this up is because it does have some impact on the global scene, because then other countries look to put on retaliatory tariffs on maybe some American products. And while I think sometimes, it sounds a little hyperbolic to say that there's going to be a trade war, like the United States is suddenly going to cut off all trade with the EU, there could be some real, tariffs and slow ups in trade that could hurt, economies of everyone. So, there's really nothing that powerful to come from these tariffs, I would think, as a trade war, but at the same time, they're likely just to be detrimental. One interesting piece of analysis was from Peter Schiff, who pointed out that since, Trump is kind of unilaterally putting on these tariffs, they're unlikely to have the effects that he wants in the United States, thinking that the United States steel companies would start to maybe increase their ability to produce more steel. But because it takes so long to put a steel factory together, it really wouldn't be worth the investment from the steel companies, because in a couple of years, if you elect a different president, then suddenly they're removing the tariffs and now there's no need for the increased capacity. It's a lot of malinvestment that could occur. And so that's just one of the many reasons, but I thought that was a pretty unique and keen piece of analysis. The other thing, just want to mention, I think this was Bastiat who said, if where goods don't cross borders, armies will. And I think that's really important, that we always need to focus on trade, and the more trade you have going on, the less likely it is that you're going to go to war. This is kind of one of the things that's cited as to why the U.S. wouldn't go to war with China, is because there's so much trade between the two countries. But trade helps in a lot of ways. It helps expose cultures to each other in that way. They see the benefits of your culture and you see the benefits of theirs, and trading with them, you meet them, and it humanizes everyone in each other's eyes. And so, when you have sanctions against Iran and there's no trade going on between the Americans and the Iranians, that's, just a symptom of the hostility between the two countries. But at the same time, not many Americans know Iranians. So when Mike Huckabee is out there on Fox News saying that all Iranians want to do is kill the Israelis and the Mexicans, nobody, can't say, well, I know that's not true because I know an Iranian guy. So that's pretty much all I had to say on the tariffs. Generally a bad idea on the mark against Trump, but, tune into your favorite economy podcast, I guess, kind of figure out, a little bit more about that. Now, another kind of big news thing from Trump is that he has notified Congress of the selling of 210 Javelin missile systems to Ukraine. I've talked about this on the show in the past, and how the United States adding weapons to the one side of the Ukrainian civil war is likely to lead to Russia doing the same thing on the other side to try to, maintain that balance. If the Americans give the Ukrainian army too many weapons, obviously they're just going to go and try to crush the rebel groups that they're able to clearly and easily win. And so, just the more weapons that are introduced on one side, you're going to get kind of the counter thing happening on the other side. And that's also kind of what's going on, where we had Vladimir Putin announcing that Russia has developed a new, I think they're calling it a nuclear hypersonic cruise missile. The reason this is a big deal is that cruise missiles, I guess, are much harder to intercept than ballistic missiles. I think they fly at a much lower altitude, if I remember correctly. These things add to the difficulty of being able to intercept the hypersonic cruise missiles. Now, what I'm pretty sure this is a response to from Russia is America in 2002 starting to develop anti-ballistic missile systems and withdrawing from that treaty that we had with Russia, an agreement not to, advance and deploy anti-ballistic missile systems. Now, the United States has done this all over the world, and especially all around Russia. We had these systems, THAAD systems in South Korea, in Japan. I believe Taiwan has some as well, where we've considered selling some to Taiwan. We have them in Poland. Saudi Arabia has bought some as well. And so these really can encompass Russia. Of course, a lot of the times we don't say that this is because we're concerned about Russia, but because we're concerned about either the North Korean threat or the Iranian threat. And while, I don't think that's the case, but even if that was the case, Russia would still have to respond like it's a threat towards Russia, just like the United States would if, the shoe was on the other foot there. Now, the big thing that I guess there's always been trying to maintain between the United States and Soviet Union post-nuclear weapons arms race is this idea of mutually assured destruction, and that no country, the United States or Russia, would start a nuclear war with the other country because the end result will just be that everybody is dead because there's so many nuclear weapons. A lot of people attribute or give credit to this theory as kind of what allowed the world to exit the Cold War without obliterating itself. I mean, there's some good arguments for and against it, definitely. But Vladimir Putin is deeper in that, and he felt with that the advancements the Americans were making in their nuclear weapons programs, including their anti-missile program, that America was getting close to achieving first strike capability against Russia, meaning that the United States felt they could annihilate Russia's nuclear arsenal, or at least devastate it to the point where they only have a few ways to fire back and we could intercept those missiles, allowing the United States to really, wipe Russia out off the map without taking too many casualties ourselves. And the reason this would be a problem is because now the United States would have less of a reason not to go to nuclear war should it come to that. So I think this is Putin's counter to that. And we saw this, I believe it was either a 2014 or a 2012 interview where Putin is talking to a former U.S. ambassador. And they're talking about the anti-missile systems, and the ambassador says it's a boondoggle, and Putin very seriously says, okay, but what do you want me to do about that? Because it looks to me like you guys are getting very close to having the capability, or at least believing you have the capability to carry out a first strike against us. And so I think that my guess would be that this is definitely Putin's response to that. Now, one of the unfortunate things is I'm guessing this is going to be used to, drum up some fear against Russia. Oh, this is back to the days of the Cold War where we had to worry about the Soviet dictatorship trying to wipe us off the face of the map. But, tensions with Russia really don't have to be this hostile. I mean, there's no reason for the United States to be butting up against Russia in either Ukraine or Syria. You really don't have that kind of ideological conflict anymore where it's the communists versus the capitalists or anything like that. This is just now kind of devolved into, well, we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, and so we have to take them on or something like that. A couple other stories going on with Russia. We have Russia and Qatar. Qatar talking about Qatar buying S-400 ground-to-air missile systems from Russia. Of course, these have already been sold to Turkey, and I think Saudi Arabia has looked at them as well. I believe these are missile systems comparable to the U.S. Patriot missile system, or it could be American THAAD missile systems. Either way, they're surface-to-air missiles, so they could shoot down planes or take out other ballistic missiles. I guess Qatar getting these would be somewhat significant just because of their place on the Persian Gulf, right in between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And it would be significant because America has our largest base in the Middle East. The base in Doha has 10,000 U.S. troops there. And so if there's a Russian missile system right over there, that may one day create some conflicts or turbulence there in Qatar. Again, I do think one of the actual signs it is that the Russian S-400 missile system may be just that much more efficient than the American version, because it seems like even a lot of countries who would have strategic reasons to more ally themselves with the United States seem to be floating towards the Russian missile. Although this could just be an influence buying campaign, maybe both Turkey and Qatar see themselves falling out of the Israel, Saudi Arabia, United States bubble in the Middle East and look to buy some influence up with Russia by buying these missile systems. We also have Vladimir Putin kind of saying, show me the evidence. situation with the Russiagate indictment. He's saying that, the Mueller, I guess, probe hasn't, sent them the information, because how it would work is that a Russian court would determine if they, committed a crime and should be extradited to the United States to face charges. Moving on to the Iran nuclear deal, it looks like the European countries are trying to piece together some kind of add-on agreement that would appease Donald Trump enough to remain within the nuclear agreement and continue to have the sanctions relief on Iran. Coming up, I think like in early to middle May, Donald Trump will either have to make a decision to continue the sanctions relief against Iran or to put sanctions back on Iran. Putting the sanctions back on Iran would move America out of compliance with the nuclear agreement. And, where we go from there's a lot of guesses. But what the Europeans are looking to do is to get Iran to agree to some kind of ballistic missile agreement and maybe stop testing ballistic missiles or cap the range of their program or something like that to appease Trump so Donald Trump stays within the agreement. It doesn't seem like either Iran or Russia has been very receptive to this. Remember, Russia is a signatory to the Iran nuclear agreement. Some of these conversations occurred when Donald Trump was talking to Angela Merkel, who had just been, got a new coalition and 4-year term as Germany's chancellor. There was like a 5-month period where it looked like she may not have had enough parliamentary votes to retain that position, but she was able to put together a coalition big enough to do so. While Merkel and Trump were talking, they also talked about the threats that they see posed from the Russian missile. And of course, NATO is drumming in on that as well and trying to reassert its importance as it really wanes. I mean, there's really no reason for NATO. It's not like Russia's gonna invade Eastern Europe. Yet at the same time, they always pretend like there's these threats from Russia, when really most of what Russia is doing is in reaction to Western NATO and US moves. Now, the other thing I just wanted to mention with Iran is we continue to have all of these people saying that the United States needs to stay in Syria, and this is mostly coming from like the neoconservative and American think tank foreign policy wants, saying, we have to force Iran out of Syria and out of Iraq, and we have to stop Iran's growing influence across the Middle East and the Shia crescent. A lot of this is overblown, and a lot of this is because of American intervention in the Middle East created either the power vacuum situation in Iraq, or by making the Sunni, rebel jihadist type so strong in Syria that Syria was forced to call on Iran to help them. Some updates on the Syrian battlefield. From Afrin, we have 36 forces allied to Assad being killed in Turkish airstrikes. Turkey continues to wage a pretty heavy bombing campaign, dropping like 30 airstrikes on some days on Afrin. This is killing a lot of civilians, over 125,000 people displaced so far. It does look like Turkey is making some more rapid gains in Afrin. The first month or so of that Operation Olive Branch is what Turkey called it, has gone very slow. But about a week ago, Turkey had an addition of special operation forces, which I guess are now on the ground in Syria, calling in airstrikes against Kurdish and Syrian Assad allied positions. We also have 8 Turkish soldiers being killed in a single day in that operation. And so it's not like things are going super smoothly for Turkey there, but they do seem to be going faster and having a lot of push from the Free Syrian Army, Islamist rebels into that region. I read the United States budget for our Syrian operations for 2019. It looks like we're going to look to give the Kurds 25,000 AK-47s, which is really interesting because in Afghanistan, the United States is trying to switch out all the Russian-made weapons they use. I think they use Kalashnikovs for United States-made M4s and M16s. And so I guess it's interesting that we already have given weapons, or the Afghan Army already has enough weapons, and we're trying to force them to take weapons that they don't want. And then at the same time, we're giving the Kurds AK-47s rather than selling them M4s or M16s. Of course, I always find it interesting when everybody's always up in arms about the whole gun control thing. Here we're going to give 25,000 actual automatic weapons to a bunch of people, that we're not vetting all of them. A lot of them are going to go to, Kurdish people looking to fight for their own rights, but there's also a good chance that these end up on the black market in Syria, and who knows whose hands they end up in, but certainly a lot of American weapons that have gone to Syria have ended up in the hands of jihadists, and then killing innocent people are fighters from, Russia, the YPG fighters, several other people who are involved in the Syrian civil war. All right, and then we have the East Ghouta situation, which is, of course, the situation in Syria that the most of the mainstream media is paying attention to. Of course, they're outlining the tragedy of the people of East Ghouta and blaming everything on the Assad government. Of course, when the situation was in Raqqa or West Mosul, where the United States was carrying out a heavy bombing campaign against a terror group hiding in a civilian population, they had absolutely nothing to say. Now that is happening to Assad. There's calls for the United States and Western countries to do something, and there's a lot of demonization going on there. And it's not that what Assad is doing is a good thing. Certainly, he's killing a lot of innocent people. He's trying to liberate neighborhoods from jihadist factions in Syria. It looks like the Syrian army has started a ground invasion of East Ghouta, taking now 10%, but likely the easiest 10% that they're going to take of the neighborhood there. There's a lot of reports that no one has taken the Syrian-Russia humanitarian corridor they're offering. Of course, they're not bombing for 5 hours a day in order to allow people to flee East Ghouta. But it does look like the rebel groups continue to shell that corridor while it's open, making it impossible for people to flee through it. And of course they want to do this because if all the civilians flee from East Ghouta, then they won't have the human shields to protect them from the Syrian airstrikes. A couple things going on at the UN. The United States is pushing another resolution claiming that Assad is using chemical weapons. Of course, if they're able to get this resolution through, I think it's going to be used as an excuse by the United States to take action against the Assad government. And we've also had Boris Johnson, who's the UK foreign minister, saying the same thing, that they would consider taking action in Syria if Assad was proven to be using chemical weapons. Of course, there's no proof this is going on at all. At this point, they're not even alleging that Assad is using more dangerous chemical weapons like sarin gas, which they've done in the past. They're just saying that he's using chlorine gas, which would be a much less effective chemical weapon. At the same time, if you look at the situation, Assad is winning the war on the ground in Syria, and so long as he doesn't use chemical weapons, then the Western countries won't have an excuse to get involved, and there's a better chance that he takes more and more of his country back. And so they would have to present pretty strong proof to really prove, and the burden of proof is on them to prove that these chemical weapons attacks are occurring. And as we had James Mattis admit that there's no evidence that any of these chlorine attacks have happened, and we have the excellent work of Seymour Hersh, who debunked the claims of these chemical weapons attack both in Khan Sheikhoun and East Ghouta. At the same time, we have China holding up the United States looking to extend the sanctions that we put on North Korea and the ships and companies that do business with North Korea to having the UN adopt those sanctions as well. China is holding those up, saying that the United States has yet to submit proof that these companies and ships are doing illegal business with North Korea. I had talked about this on the UN show, but I think it's an important note here that in both of these stories, the US mainstream media is demonizing Russia or China for holding up these sanctions, saying, they're getting in the way of the global order and presenting a problem for the United States, just trying to help everyone. We have Senator Lindsey Graham saying that war with North Korea would be a good thing. Absolutely terrifying that he believes that. Daniel Larison wrote a pretty good article that I'll link to in the show notes page explaining how North Korea isn't an imminent threat towards America. In order for the President Trump to kind of take that unilateral action to start a war against North Korea would have to either have started a war with the United States, or the threat that they're going to attack the United States would have to be imminent, means right about to happen. The only thing you could do is attack them to prevent it. But Daniel Larison's kind of pointing out, just because North Korea has the ability to attack the United States doesn't make them an imminent threat to the United States, but this is kind of the justification that Pompeo and others have suggested, as well as Trump himself, is that once they have the technology, they're enough of a threat that we could go ahead and attack them anytime we want. So very scary stuff going on there in North Korea. A couple of quick stories from Afghanistan before I wrap up. We have a suicide bomber, I believe a Taliban suicide bomber, targeting what is a Australian convoy. Nobody in the convoy was killed. 5 were injured, and then an Afghani child was killed, a little 12-year-old girl, I believe. Walter Jones is pushing a resolution in the House that would prevent U.S. funds from going to Afghan warlords who have engaged in taking young boys and then sleeping with them. This is kind of one of the disturbing practices of the Afghan warlords. And throughout the Afghan war, since the United States got involved, we've allied ourselves with some of these warlords who, have this practice where they take a little boy from the village and, chain them to their bed and sleep with them and do terrible things to them. And so, on the last show, when you heard that clip of Walter Jones saying that he's so frustrated with the situation, all he's trying to do is saying, hey, let's stop giving money to the pedophiles. And yet this is something that you really have to push, and it's not an easy thing to get through in the United States Congress, and it probably won't. We'll probably continue to arm these warlords like we have been throughout this entire war. All right, the last story I wanted to talk about is that, throughout the show, I kind of talked about all these situations where we're giving weapons to, the YPG and the Afghan Army, and we're giving money to people in Afghanistan who are pedophiles. And we spend all this money developing these anti-missile systems that cost billions, if not trillions of dollars. And yet, the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico has 4,000 untested rape kits. And so, I don't know, it just, the priorities don't make sense at all. And it's just so stupid that we waste all this money on all these stupid projects when, real justice could be brought to people within the United States. All right, that's where I'll wrap up the show. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, libertarianinstitute.org. The new website is immersionnews.com. Check it out. It's got all the stories I talk about on there. Libertarian Union on Facebook, at KYAAALE on Twitter, and join the private Facebook group, Foreign Policy Focus.